I'll never forget the morning I woke up to find my $47,000 astronomical observatory wrapped in yellow caution tape like some kind of crime scene. The smell of fresh morning dew mixed with the acrid scent of that cheap plastic tape, and I could hear my neighbor's dog barking frantically at the construction crew that had apparently shown up at dawn to assess structural violations. But here's the thing that HOA treasurer Rick Pendleton didn't know about me. I'm not just some stargazing hobbyist. I'm a cybersecurity analyst who spent 5 years building this dream, and I had digital dirt on him that could end his little power trip forever. Before I tell you how I completely destroyed this guy's life, I need to know. Are you dealing with HOA tyranny where you live? Drop a comment and let me know what state you're in, because what I learned about fighting these petty dictators could help you too. Let me back up and tell you how this whole nightmare started. My name's Jake Stevenson, I'm 29, and I work in IT security for a tech company here in Boulder, Colorado. After years of living in apartments with terrible light pollution, I finally saved enough to buy my first house in Ridgeview Estates, specifically because it was on the edge of town where I could actually see the stars. See, my dad was a commercial pilot, and some of my best childhood memories were of him teaching me about constellations and how to navigate by the stars. When he died in a plane crash when I was 12, I promised myself I'd build the observatory we'd always talked about. It took me 17 years, but I finally did it. The house came with a decent-sized backyard, and I spent my first year there carefully planning and saving for my dream setup. We're talking a 14-inch Schmidt-Cassegrain telescope, a motorized dome that opens and closes, all the astrophotography gear you could imagine. My girlfriend Sarah, who's getting her PhD in astrophysics at CU Boulder, helped me design the whole thing so it could actually contribute to real research. I even started a YouTube channel called Suburban Stargazer, where I'd share the incredible images I was capturing and teach people about astronomy. Nothing crazy commercial, just sharing my passion and maybe inspiring other people to look up once in a while. The channel was actually doing pretty well, bringing in about 15 grand a year, which helped offset the cost of all that expensive equipment. But apparently, pursuing your dreams and sharing your passion with the world is a violation of HOA covenants. Enter Rick Pendleton, a 61-year-old retired hotel manager who'd somehow clawed his way into the treasurer position of our HOA. This guy was everything you'd expect from an HOA power tripper, polo shirts tucked into khaki shorts year-round, a voice that could curdle milk, and the kind of smile that made you want to count your fingers after shaking hands. The first time I met Rick was at a neighborhood barbecue about 6 months after I'd finished the observatory. He walked up to me with that fake friendly demeanor, the smell of cheap cologne barely masking something that felt off about him. "So you're the astronomy guy," he said, looking over at my backyard where the white dome was clearly visible. "Interesting hobby, very prominent." I should have picked up on the way he said prominent, like it was a 4-letter word, but I was just excited to talk about my setup. I started explaining the telescope specifications, how the dome worked, how Sarah was using it for her doctoral research on variable stars. "YouTube channel too, huh?" Rick interrupted, and there was something sharp in his tone. "Making money off it?" "A little," I admitted. "Nothing major, just helps cover equipment costs." That's when his whole demeanor changed. His smile got tighter, more predatory. "Well, we'll have to make sure everything's up to code. Wouldn't want any commercial activities violating our residential covenants." The way he said it sent chills down my spine. This wasn't a friendly neighbor concerned about property values. This was a threat. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing Rick driving by my house more often, always slowing down, always staring at the observatory. Sometimes he'd have his phone out, taking pictures. Sarah noticed it too. "That guy gives me the creeps," she said one evening as we watched him idle outside our house for the 3rd time that week. "What's his deal?" I was about to find out. The first official shot fired in what would become the observatory war came in the form of a certified letter. Thick cream-colored envelope, official HOA letterhead, the works. My hands were actually shaking as I opened it, because somehow I knew my peaceful life was about to get very complicated. Notice of covenant violation was printed in bold letters at the top. The letter, signed by Rick Pendleton in his capacity as HOA treasurer, informed me that my unauthorized commercial structure was in violation of Section 12.3 of our community covenants, which prohibited business operations or commercial activities in residential zones. The kicker? I had 30 days to remove the structure or face daily fines of $200 starting immediately. $200 a day. For pursuing my childhood dream and sharing my love of astronomy with the world. I read that letter 3 times. The paper making a slight crackling sound in my trembling hands. Sarah looked over my shoulder, and I could feel her anger radiating like heat from a furnace. "This is insane," she whispered. "Your YouTube channel isn't a business. You barely make enough to cover your equipment costs." But here's where my professional background started kicking in. See, when you work in cybersecurity, you develop this paranoid habit of questioning everything and everyone. Something about Rick's aggressive push to get rid of my observatory didn't add up. Why did he care so much? What was he afraid of? That night, I did what any good IT professional would do. I started digging. Now, I want to share something most people don't know about HOAs. There's this little-known legal principle called selective enforcement. If an HOA doesn't consistently apply their rules to everyone, they can actually lose the right to enforce those rules at all. It's like a statute of limitations, but for busybody neighbors on power trips. So I started documenting everything in my neighborhood that could possibly be considered a commercial activity. Mrs. Henderson runs a daycare out of her house. The Johnsons have a massive vegetable garden that they clearly sell at the farmer's market. 3 different neighbors run various MLM schemes from their garages. But more importantly, I started monitoring the digital footprint of our neighborhood, and that's where things got really interesting. When you're in IT security, you learn to see patterns in data that most people miss. Network traffic, digital signatures, metadata. It all tells a story if you know how to read it. So I set up a small monitoring system, nothing invasive, just tracking the publicly available Wi-Fi networks and internet traffic patterns around our block. What I found made my blood run cold. Rick's house had an unusual amount of internet traffic, way more than you'd expect from a retired guy living alone. Multiple devices connecting and disconnecting throughout the week, different IP addresses, patterns that looked exactly like a short-term rental operation. I cross-referenced this data with public Airbnb and VRBO listings in our area, and there it was, listed under a slightly modified version of Rick's address. Cozy Boulder Retreat, mountain views, hot tub, perfect for tech conferences. The photos showed Rick's house, inside and out. His furniture, his kitchen, even his master bedroom. The listing had over 200 5-star reviews dating back 3 years. Rick Pendleton, the HOA treasurer who was threatening to fine me $200 a day for my commercial activity, was running an illegal Airbnb operation that was generating roughly $5,000 a month in pure profit. But I wasn't done digging. Once you find one thread, you pull it and see what unravels. I started analyzing the metadata from photos on his Airbnb listing, cross-referencing booking patterns with local events, even tracking the digital signatures of guest reviews. What I discovered was a sophisticated operation. Rick had been running this Airbnb for almost 3 years, carefully timing bookings around HOA meetings and neighborhood events to minimize detection. He'd made modifications to his house, installed a keyless entry system, upgraded his Wi-Fi, even added a hot tub, all clear violations of the same HOA covenants he was trying to use against me. But the real smoking gun came when I analyzed his tax filings. See, all Airbnb income is supposed to be reported to the IRS. Property owners are required to pay taxes on rental income, especially when it's their primary residence. I couldn't access Rick's personal tax records, obviously, but I could estimate his unreported income based on his booking frequency and rates. Conservative estimate? Rick had failed to report over $180,000 in rental income over 3 years. We're not talking about a small oversight here. This was systematic tax evasion that could land him in federal prison, and he was using his position as HOA treasurer to eliminate anyone who might draw attention to the neighborhood, anyone whose activities might bring scrutiny that could expose his illegal operation. That's when I realized this wasn't really about my observatory at all. This was about Rick protecting his dirty secret, and I had accidentally become a threat he needed to eliminate. The harassment escalated quickly after that first violation notice. Rick seemed to interpret my lack of immediate compliance as a declaration of war, and he responded accordingly. First came the noise complaints. Apparently, the whirring sound of my observatory dome opening and closing after sunset was disturbing the peace. Never mind that it made less noise than a garbage disposal and only operated for about 30 seconds total each evening. Then came the light pollution accusations. The dim red lights I used to preserve night vision while operating my telescope were suddenly excessive illumination that violated the neighborhood's dark sky ordinance. This one actually made me laugh, because anyone who knows anything about astronomy knows that red lights are specifically designed to minimize light pollution. But Rick wasn't done. He started showing up at my house during my YouTube filming sessions, claiming he was documenting continued commercial activity. Picture this. I'm trying to film an educational video about Jupiter's moons, and this guy is literally standing in my backyard with his phone, recording me recording the sky. The psychological pressure was intense. Sarah started having anxiety attacks about coming home, never knowing if Rick would be there waiting. My YouTube viewers were asking why I seemed so stressed in recent videos. I was losing sleep, losing focus at work, losing the joy I'd always found in stargazing. But the worst part was the way Rick had turned my passion into a weapon against me. Every time I opened that observatory dome, every time I set up my camera equipment, I was giving him more ammunition for his harassment campaign. That's when I decided to fight back, and I had weapons Rick didn't even know existed. The beautiful thing about being an IT professional is that you learn to think in systems and processes. While Rick was playing checkers with his petty harassment campaign, I was setting up a chess game he couldn't even see. First, I documented everything. Every interaction, every violation notice, every time he showed up on my property. I set up security cameras around my house, ostensibly to protect my expensive telescope equipment from vandalism, but really to capture evidence of Rick's harassment. But more importantly, I started building a digital case file that would make any prosecutor salivate. Bank records showing deposits that perfectly matched his Airbnb booking calendar, utility bills showing usage spikes that coincided with guest stays, digital communications between Rick and his guests that I could access through public Wi-Fi logs. I even found evidence that Rick had been manipulating HOA finances to cover his tracks. Small amounts of money being moved around, maintenance fees, that coincidentally matched his tax obligations for the property improvements he'd made for his Airbnb guests. But I needed more than just evidence. I needed allies. That's where my YouTube channel became unexpectedly powerful. I started documenting the harassment in my videos, not in a whiny way, but as educational content about property rights and HOA overreach. When Neighbors Attack, Understanding Your Rights Against HOA Tyranny got over 50,000 views in the first week. The response was incredible. Viewers from all over the country started sharing their own HOA horror stories. Some were attorneys who offered free legal advice. Others were journalists who wanted to investigate further. A few were even government officials who were concerned about HOA abuse of power. But the real game changer came when Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a professor of astrophysics at CU Boulder, saw my videos and reached out. She'd been following my research contributions through Sarah's work, and she was furious that an HOA was trying to shut down legitimate scientific activity. "This is exactly the kind of citizen science we need more of," she told me during our first phone call. "And if they're targeting you for this, what message does that send to other amateur astronomers?" Dr. Walsh connected me with the Colorado Springs Astronomical Society, who had dealt with similar issues before. They put me in touch with a property rights attorney who specialized in HOA disputes. Suddenly, I had a legal team, scientific backing, and a growing army of supporters who were invested in my fight. Rick had no idea what was coming. The turning point came during what I now call the Great Airbnb Exposure of 2024. I had been gathering evidence for months, building an airtight case against Rick's illegal operation. But I needed the perfect moment to deploy it, a moment when the maximum number of people would witness his downfall. That moment came during the quarterly HOA meeting where Rick planned to formally present his case for forcing me to remove my observatory. He'd been promoting this meeting for weeks, encouraging neighbors to attend to address the ongoing commercial activity that's affecting our property values. The meeting was held in the community center on a Tuesday evening in late March. Rick had made sure to pack the room with his supporters, mostly older residents who didn't like change and were easily manipulated by his property values rhetoric. I showed up early with Sarah, Dr. Walsh, and my attorney. I also brought a laptop, a projector, and a carefully prepared presentation that would change everything. Rick opened the FOUDA meeting with his usual performance. He talked about maintaining the character of our neighborhood and preventing commercial exploitation of residential property. He showed pictures of my observatory, complained about the constant stream of visitors coming to see my telescope. This was maybe 3 people total over 6 months, and painted me as some kind of neighborhood menace. The smell of stale coffee and nervous sweat filled the room as Rick built up to his grand finale, a motion to declare my observatory a public nuisance subject to immediate removal. That's when I stood up and asked for the floor. "Before we vote on anything," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the suddenly silent room, "I think everyone should know about the real commercial activity that's been happening in our neighborhood for the past 3 years. I connected my laptop to the projector, and the first slide filled the screen, a screenshot of Rick's Airbnb listing complete with photos of his house and over 200 glowing reviews. The room erupted. You could literally hear gasps echoing off the walls as neighbors recognized Rick's house in the photos. Someone in the back shouted, "Is that your hot tub, Rick?" But I wasn't done. The next slide showed a timeline of Rick's Airbnb bookings cross-referenced with his complaints about my observatory. Every time he had guests staying at his house, he filed a noise complaint about my telescope. Every time his booking calendar was full, he sent violation notices about my commercial activity. Then came the financial breakdown. 3 years of unreported income, conservative estimates of tax evasion, modifications to his property that violated the same covenants he was trying to use against me. So let me get this straight. I said, looking directly at Rick as his face turned the color of an overripe tomato. "You're running an illegal short-term rental that violates our HOA covenants, evading federal taxes on over $180,000 in unreported income and using your position as treasurer to eliminate neighbors who might expose your operation?" The room was dead silent except for the hum of the projector fan. Rick was opening and closing his mouth like a fish, but no sound was coming out. That's when Dr. Walsh stood up and delivered the knockout punch. "Furthermore," she said in her clear professor voice, "Mr. Kmet, Stevenson's Observatory has been contributing valuable research data to the University of Colorado's Variable Star program. This HOA isn't just harassing a neighbor, you're actively trying to shut down legitimate scientific research." What happened next was like watching a controlled demolition in slow motion. Rick tried to stammer some kind of defense, claiming the Airbnb listing was fake and that I had fabricated the evidence. But when Mrs. Chen, who lived next door to Rick, stood up and said she'd been wondering about all the strange cars and suitcases she'd seen for years, his story started falling apart. Then Mr. Rodriguez mentioned the construction noise from Rick's hot tub installation that had violated quiet hours for weeks. Another neighbor brought up the keyless entry system Rick had installed without architectural approval. Within 30 minutes, Rick had gone from HOA prosecutor to public enemy number 1. The motion to remove my observatory was not only defeated, it was replaced with a motion to immediately suspend Rick from all HOA duties pending a full investigation of his activities. But the real satisfaction came when I handed my attorney a manila folder containing copies of all my evidence, along with a formal complaint ready to be filed with the IRS. "You have 48 hours to resign from the HOA and make full restitution for your tax obligations," my attorney told Rick in front of the entire room. "Otherwise, this evidence goes to federal authorities tomorrow morning." The metallic taste of victory was sweet as I watched 3 years of Rick's arrogance and harassment crumble in real time. The aftermath was swift and devastating for Rick. He resigned from the HOA the next day, and within a week, his Airbnb listing had mysteriously disappeared from all platforms. Turns out, once neighbors knew what to look for, it was easy to document continued violations and report them to both the city and the rental platforms. The IRS investigation took longer, but the outcome was inevitable. When you've been systematically evading taxes on 6 figures of income for 3 years, there's no way to make that go away quietly. The penalties alone were enough to force Rick to sell his house and move out of the neighborhood entirely. But here's the part that really made me smile. The new HOA board, elected after Rick's resignation, not only officially approved my observatory as a community asset, they actually featured it in the neighborhood newsletter as an example of the kind of innovative residents that make Ridgeview Estates special. My YouTube channel exploded after I posted the full story of the observatory war. The video got over 1 million views, and I gained 50,000 new subscribers who were fascinated by the intersection of astronomy, property rights, and digital detective work. The additional ad revenue more than covered my legal fees and helped me upgrade my telescope to an even better model. Sarah got her PhD and was offered a postdoc position at the National Radio Astronomy Observatory, partly based on the research she'd conducted using our backyard observatory. She still uses the telescope for her work, and we've discovered 2 new variable stars that now bear our names in the International Astronomical Database. Here's what I learned from this whole experience that might help you if you're dealing with your own HOA tyrant. These people aren't usually motivated by genuine concern for the neighborhood. There's almost always something else going on: financial interests, personal vendettas, or in Rick's case, covering up their own illegal activities. If someone is targeting you specifically while ignoring similar violations from other residents, start asking questions. Document everything, look for patterns, and remember that in the digital age, almost everyone leaves traces of their real activities online. And here's a pro tip from the cybersecurity world. People who are breaking rules themselves are often the most aggressive about attacking others for minor infractions. It's psychological projection combined with a desperate need to deflect attention from their own crimes. The best part? I still get messages from neighbors thanking me for exposing Rick's operation. Turns out, a lot of people had been suspicious about the constant stream of strangers in the neighborhood, but nobody had put the pieces together until I laid out the evidence. My observatory is still there, still contributing to real scientific research, and still bringing me the same joy and connection to my father's memory that I'd dreamed of as a kid. Rick Pendleton is long gone, probably running scams in some other neighborhood, but at least it's not my problem anymore. Sometimes the good guys really do win. You just have to be smarter than the bad guys, and in Rick's case, that wasn't exactly a high bar to clear. So what's your HOA horror story? Drop it in the comments below. I read every single one, and who knows, maybe your situation will inspire my next video. And if you're dealing with something similar to what I went through, remember, document everything, question their motives, and never underestimate the power of a well-timed data dump at a public meeting. Next week, I'm going to share the story of how I helped my neighbor use mineral rights from 1887 to stop an HOA from forcing him to remove his vegetable garden. Trust me, you're not going to want to miss that one.